that's a pretty high rate of yes, and it's not unusual. That was just about 90% of the people on the call there um, have had some kind of an issue, and I know that we've um, helped at least a dozen businesses around town after prevent future attacks and recover from existing attacks. So let's jump right in and talk about some statistics. So these numbers come from a study put out by IBM last year. They found that about 40% of all spam email contains some form of malicious attachment, something that would encrypt a hard drive, destroy a hard drive, or give someone access to information on a computer. And for businesses that were hit with ransomware, that same study found that about 70% of companies paid the ransom. The average ransom was between $2,000 and $4,000. Now, that there was a study by CBS that found that in 2016, damages or losses due to ransomware were about $1.5 billion. The estimated damages from the WannaCry virus that came out a few months ago and swept through much of the United Kingdom were $4 billion. Now that is a very large number, and sometimes people will ask where that number came from. Well, you can imagine a healthcare system with tens of thousands of employees, and they can't treat patients because they can't access patient records from their computers. They were canceling non-life-threatening surgeries all across the United Kingdom for the better part of 2 days when that when the WannaCry virus hit. And for those companies that are hit, whether they pay or not, the average time to recovery, or recovery time objective, is 2 days, meaning that whether they paid, whether they recovered from backups, it took a business 2 days to get back to normal. So that's a long time. It's a long time to be down. Now, these numbers are produced essentially by big companies for big companies using data provided by big companies. So these are some test results here from CloudCover's own tests that we've done with clients. And what we've found is that if for companies that well, I guess I should back up and mention what a phishing test is. So the phishing test is essentially a fake email that goes out and it tries to get people to click on a link, open an attachment, or maybe visit a website and put in a password. And these test results, or these numbers that I'm going to give you, are fairly consistent no matter what that email looks like, right? In some cases, the emails that go out are, the refrigerator is going to be cleaned at 3 o'clock on Friday. Please open the attached Word document to see if you still have food in the refrigerator. And now people will open that attachment at about the same rate, whether or not they actually have a refrigerator in their office. So if your office doesn't have a break room, and that break room that it doesn't have also does not have a refrigerator, people will still open that email, which is fairly surprising. And so what we can see from this graph here is that around 15% opened that first email. And that 15% open rate is pretty normal for a company that would describe its workforce as not technically savvy. So if that sounds like your company, this on average is about how many people would click on the email, open the attachment. And for companies that would self-describe their workforce as college-educated, young, tech-savvy, or everyone has an iPhone, the open rate for these emails is about 2 to 3%. So that is a much better rate, but for a company that has 200 people, if 2 people would click on an email that would open an attachment that would encrypt their hard drive and work its way through the network and encrypt the server, that is still a high number. And so over repeated tests, after people click on a link, they get some training, we run another test, people get more training, we can see that the average open rate is much better over time, right? Initially, after an in-person training, the rate will go down to 0. People are now suspicious of any attachments that they get, but it definitely creeps back over time, and repeated training is very helpful for people. Now, these statistics are for fairly generic emails. If we were to use an actual name of someone at an employee or at a company, right? If you happen to have someone named Jim or Bob or Stephanie at a company, and we use a real name, the open rates will jump up to about 20% for both the self-described not technically savvy workforce and the self-described technically savvy workforce. And that we can get that 20% open rate by doing nothing more than going to a company's website, grabbing a copy of their logo, and putting the logo in the bottom of the email that goes out. We'll get about 20% of people opening that email. So I'd like to pop up another survey here and just see how many companies have done a phishing test, where you've sent out emails to employees and see if anyone has clicked on them. Okay.
How would you do a phishing test?
Okay, that's a great question. So in our case, we subscribe to a service, and what we'll do is get a list of emails off of a company's server or from their hosted Exchange or Gmail. We will upload that list of email addresses into the software, and it will send out an email, and then it records who clicks on a link, who opens an attachment, or who visits a website. And those tests are free up to 100 people. The free version tends to be a fairly generic email. The paid version, and I guess the cost for that around $15 a person a year. The paid version will vary the content of the email, and it will not send everyone in the company an email at once. And it looks like about half the participants have run those phishing tests. And I will have a link on the end of the email where if you're interested, we can run one of those tests for you. It doesn't cost anything to run the test and have some idea what your risk is. Okay, so for our college-educated workforce and our non-college, kind of non-tech savvy workforce, on average, it takes people about 12 hours before that first email is open. So kind of regardless of what the technical skill of the workforce, when someone's sending a targeted attack at your company, the average time until basically total destruction or loss of your data is around 12 hours. I've got a few more statistics here. The average office worker will receive around 121 emails a day, and depending on which numbers you look at, somewhere just over 2% of those attachments, or 1 out of 131, so a little bit higher, or lower, I guess, will contain some form of malware. So that is, right, for your average office worker, that they will end up with 1 or 2 chances a day to click on something that really would harm their computer or the entire network. And when they do click on it, take about 12 hours on average before they make that click. One of the comments that we get on a fairly regular basis is, we have Macs. Macs don't get viruses. Well, there are 290 known security vulnerabilities for an iPhone. And if your office happens to have public wireless that's connected to the rest of your network, and someone walks in with an iPhone and hops on your public network, or maybe it has a password and you give them the password so they can connect, there's a good chance that phone or laptop or Mac, whatever it is, could infect the rest of the network. And then another statistic that's a little surprising is 9.8% of computers aren't patched. So once a month now, Microsoft releases a round of security patches, and by default, computers go out at 3 in the morning, they download the patches, they install them, and they reboot. And this is how security flaws are patched or taken care of. But almost 10% of computers are not patched. Now, if you're a large company, right, the way this happens is if you're the healthcare system in the United Kingdom, and you've got a laptop or a desktop that sits on a desk that's used when a doctor shows up once a month, or maybe it's only used by a summer intern, or they're opening up a new office, they've picked a computer up out of a warehouse that hasn't been turned on in 6 months, and that computer is not patched. If you're a smaller office, you've got 20 people that work for you and no one is patching your computers or monitoring that, right? You could easily have 2 or 3 that don't have those patches. And if we look at some of the more recent outbreaks that have happened, Microsoft's response or reply when this comes out is basically, well, we released a patch 2 months ago. Why didn't you install it? And so a large number of issues can be solved by applying security patches. So I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about the history of ransomware and how we got to 2017, where we are now, where ransomware is in the news. How did Equifax get hacked? And if you've been watching the news lately, the SEC was hacked yesterday, or reported that they had been hacked yesterday. And why are all of these hacks happening now, and why are they in the news? Well, I did not make a survey about average age, but if you're like me and old enough to remember floppy disks back in 1986, when the first virus came out, right, in general, if you were careful about which drive you stuck your floppy into, or you moved the little tab in the corner to write protect the disk, then you were pretty safe. And when there was a problem, it would tend to happen immediately, right? The next time that computer rebooted, or 30 seconds later, the computer would stop working. And when you have any kind of a virus that infects at that rate and the damage happens that quickly, it doesn't spread. If a new strain of Ebola came out that was fatal within 30 seconds after contracting it, right, it would not have a chance to spread. And the virus writers realized this, and so they started putting in time delays. The virus would have to infect 20 computers before it would trigger, or it would trigger 30 days after install or on a specific date. And now that people didn't know they had the virus could spread far and wide. And 7 years after that, right, in the mid-90s, people had started connecting their computers together. You had an office network. And the virus writers were able to take advantage of that and make a virus travel from computer to computer without human intervention. And a couple of years after that, when the internet became popular, it was now possible to get a virus by visiting a website. And a full 8 years later, we started to see viruses that would encrypt files. And so up to this point, it's nearly 25 years of PC viruses. Viruses are written by people just to see if they can do it. Right? These are hobbyists or computer enthusiasts that have spent a tremendous amount of time, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of hours, to learn enough about operating systems, security protocols, to be able to write these viruses. And it's just for fun. There was an article in the Dispatch that I wish I'd saved, but they said that the average virus writer was male, not a surprise, 15 years old, and lives at home with their parents. And typically some of the higher profile arrests that are made tend to be people, in their late teens or early 20s, not always in the US. They're typically male, and if they're details, they will tend to live in their parents, and they'll have something in the article about how shocked their parents were about what the children were up to. Okay, so let's move forward a year or two, and in the, I guess, late 2000s, it became possible to buy things online, right? So this is pretty common now, right? Everybody buys things off Amazon or eBay or with PayPal, but with the advent of being able to transfer money online, right, and something called Bitcoin, which is an anonymous currency, right? With a Visa transaction, if you buy something from me, the bank knows who you are, and then the bank knows who I am, and they know how much money was transferred and when. But the whole basis of Bitcoin is that it's anonymous and secure and not possible to see where it's coming from or where it's going. And so now that we have an electronic payment infrastructure in place, people can make money writing viruses. And in 2013, we started to see the first instances of ransomware. And now I think bad guys can encrypt your data and they can charge you to get it back. Now, this was a fairly easy thing to recover from because if you have good backups, you simply hit the restore button and you restore from backup. Well, it took virus writers about 2 years, right, to realize that if they infected computers slowly over time, or if they encrypted just a few files over time, that it became very hard to restore from backups. And what the viruses would do is they would look at a computer and they would see which documents or Excel spreadsheets haven't been updated in 6 months, and they encrypt those. Which haven't been updated in 5 months. The next day they encrypt those. The next day, and every day they move a little farther forward until by the time someone notices files are being encrypted, restoring from backup is not a great option because you would lose a month's worth of work. And then in 2016, people began to start a ransomware as a service or ransomware for hire business. And before 2016, if you wanted to write a virus or you wanted to extort someone, you really had to be an expert to do that. Right? There were kits available, but if you were not a full-time programmer with a focus on security, you really couldn't implement the kit even if you bought it. But in 2016, you can hire someone to do the attack for you, and you get a commission when the ransom is paid. And this for me, it was a pretty scary moment because going back to our email statistics, right? If you have someone that knows your company, they know real names of people in the company, they know the tone or the sentence structure of people, how they write. Maybe they know that at 3 o'clock on Fridays, a clean the refrigerator email does go out, and that if their attack goes out at 5 minutes till 3, people are going to open it because they're expecting it. Right? And it's not just the money when this happens, it's there's a certain revenge factor. If you've ever fired an employee or separated on bad terms or had a client that was angry or business partner that was upset, or maybe you worked with a company and they fired someone and they're upset at everyone around that company. This just made the attacks much easier, much easier to have happen or to perpetrate. Now, like to do a bit more history here before I get to 2017. And this is not a poll, but how many people have ever gotten the email from the Nigerian prince? Right? The one that says, if you could just give me $5,000, then I would be happy to give you $1 million when I can get my money out of the country. Well, it turns out this is not this. It's called an advanced fee scam, and this is not a new scam. I found this article here in the Milwaukee Sentinel, January 12th, 1948. And what would happen is people overseas would write to newspapers at the time asking for pen pals. And then after a few letters had gone back and forth, the request came, I really would like to come to Chicago or Minneapolis or Milwaukee and visit you. Could you please send me $4 for boat fare and I'll come and visit? And if you're like me and you've seen those emails, you've wondered, well, who clicks on those emails? Right? And to use the Nigerian prince example, even if you accept that that's true, you still have to go to the bank. You have to do an international wire transfer. And chances are pretty good that a banker is going to try and stop you from doing that international wire transfer. Right? So this is a lot to believe, and it's a lot to do if you do believe it. Well, with the advent of ransomware, it became possible to lower the bar, right? So instead of can you please send me money, foreign wire transfer? Well, maybe you could just click on the email. And if instead of having to believe in a foreign prince, maybe someone that you met with last week or that came to your office sends you an email that says, I lost my cell phone. There's a picture of my dog on it. If you see the attached picture of a dog on a phone, can you please give me a call? I'd love to get it back. Right? Or maybe the email is, I lost my wallet. This is a picture of it. Or whatever it is, right? It becomes much easier for you to just click on it. And many of these emails now will prey on someone's desire to be helpful, right? If someone in your office finds a wallet, you want them to be able to return the wallet. If they find a phone, you want them to try and help. And the people that are out there perpetrating these crimes know that. So if we take the time to learn about people, to prepare an email, get some legitimate email addresses, learn their names, and send some emails, how well does that work? Right. Well, last year, a relatively new employee in the finance department at Mattel wired $3 million to a bank in China based on one of these emails. A few months after that, Interpol arrested a 40-year-old Nigerian national known as Mike, who was accused of stealing more than $60 million from victims all over the world. And in one case, it was reported he took $15.4 million. So these frauds work. And they work at big companies, they work at small companies. One of the crimes that started to appear is when people buy houses, they get instructions from the seller's broker about where to wire the money to. And then when they show up at closing, the money's not there, and they trace through, and someone has impersonated the broker and sent the wrong bank account for the wire transfer. Sometimes these are stopped, and sometimes they're not. And people are just out. They're just out the money, so they now have no house and no way to pay for a new one. These are pretty serious examples, and they're becoming more and more common. Got a few other examples here. The National Health Service, right, talked about this briefly, and in that case, it wasn't purely financial. They were literally canceling surgeries over an entire country. Ubiquity is a company that manufactures computer products. They're known for their wireless access points and their firewalls. So this is a company that their entire business model is to produce secure hardware, secure computer equipment, and they reported in an annual report nearly a $50 million loss that happened over time as someone pretended to be their CEO. Nyana is a Korean web hosting company, and when they got hit, they ended up paying out over $1 million in ransom because all of their clients' data was encrypted. And this is a case where the clients did nothing wrong, right? It was someone that they allowed to hold their data or be responsible for their data got encrypted, and the company just had no choice but to pay. The Democratic National Committee. Some of if you follow the news about a presidential election we had in the U.S. last year, a lot of the issues relating to Russia started because someone in the Democratic National Committee clicked on a link in an email that they shouldn't have clicked on. And then about 2 weeks ago, Equifax reported that it had been hacked. And the scope of this is just almost difficult to believe. 1 out of every 2 Americans with a credit file had their data stolen. And this is not a short-term problem for people, right? There's a 50% chance that someone knows where you shop, how much money you spend, what your income is. They have your social security number, your home address, and they have that information forever. Now, another example in the last couple of days, Securities and Exchange Commission was hacked, and they reported that the criminals may have used information before it was may have had access to information before it was publicly available, and there may have been trades made on that stolen information. Now, those are all fairly large examples of big companies. What does that look like for a smaller company? Well, you can imagine that if you have a warehouse at your business and you were to, say, shut down for a few days every year to do a physical inventory. Well, if you've been out in the warehouse every night until 11 o'clock working on inventory and you haven't shipped product to customers for 4 days, and at this point you have sales reps who are calling you every 20 minutes wanting to know when they can ship product to customers. You have customer service staff in the front office that are really tired of taking the phone call about when does my equipment ship. Right? You've made a plan to have trucks and drivers lined up on Friday so that you can catch up. And you have some warehouse guys that maybe were happy about the overtime for a day or two, but now are not very happy. And you finish that warehouse audit on a Thursday at 11 o'clock, and when you show up at the office at 6 a.m. on Friday and try to open the inventory system, it doesn't open. The data is gone. It has been encrypted. And now you're not able to ship product. Right? You've got trucks lined up out the back of the warehouse. You've got a whole bunch of people that are really angry about the possibility of working through the weekend to complete another inventory. And you're out a lot of money because customers are upset that they haven't gotten their product. And there are all kinds of examples about how bad this can be when a company loses access to its data. And maybe one more example that's worth pointing out is why this is such a big why this is a much more common problem in 2017. So if we look at this situation from the criminal's perspective, right? Well, you can imagine finding a new business where up to 70% of the people that demo your product make a purchase from you, and on average, it takes about 12 hours for people to complete a demo, right? So everyone that demos your product, they do so in about 12 hours, and about 70% end up buying the product, and you make $2,000 to $4,000 a sale. And not only that, but your accountant says you probably shouldn't report the income, and you're getting paid in Bitcoin, which is not really something that the IRS can track. So tax-free, you have this amazing product, right? And in one case, you did a demo for a Korean web hosting company and you made $1 million, right? There are no employees to manage. Your only expense really is a $5 or $10 a month web hosting bill. And the craziest part about this is you didn't even have to hire sales reps to go out and make the sales, right? What happened was people recommended the software to their friends through this website you'd set up. They actually typed the emails. They picked the time that they went out. They got to choose, who got the emails, and they did all the work, right? And the cash came to you, and you paid them a commission, but only after you got to collect the money. Right? Apart from the legal and moral and ethical issues, this is really the ideal business for someone to get into. Okay, so are you really a target? Right? And I guess my response to that always is yes. For the average server that we monitor and maintain that needs to have access to the internet, so an email server or a VPN server, something where you need to access a resource across the internet, that server that you access on average will get somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 logon attempts a day. And we can see what passwords people are using, right? There's admin, Xerox, Ricoh, every brand of copier. And people are just trying usernames and passwords at random until they can connect. And so in this sense, the smaller companies are as big of a target as the larger ones, probably a bigger target because most of the people that would be on this webinar are not going to have a $100,000 firewall in place, like, say, the Columbus Metropolitan the airport authority over at Port Columbus, right? When someone scans their network, they have a very sophisticated system in place to block that person, but a smaller business just doesn't. And money is not the only answer here, right? The National Health Service is a multi-billion-dollar budget, and they got hacked. So even at random, people are definitely a target. And so I've got a short 90-second survey here that I'll pop up, and you can get a feel maybe for some of the things you could do or could be doing to limit your risk. And while I give people a chance to fill out the survey here, I'll kind of read through there. So all of your passwords and devices completely secure, right? This is an important one because Yahoo was hacked a few months ago, and if you use the same password on your network that you used with Yahoo, chances are pretty good someone knows your password. And in the case where someone has the keys, right, no lock is good enough to keep them out. And if employees aren't trained, right, if you haven't gone through the phishing test with employees to know who's likely to click on something, then there's a big vulnerability there. One of the other questions that's easy to answer are, do people focus their computer use on business reasons or on business purposes while at work, right? And this is not just people out there looking at pornography, but maybe they're trying to buy and sell a gun while at work. They're reading articles. They're on Facebook clicking around on links. When those people are on the corporate network and not split off in an isolated network, they can pose a real risk to a company. And one of the biggest ways that attacks come through are through emails. And so if you've got a great email filtering system in place, it's a great start. It's not the only answer, but if you look at your inbox and you get emails that you don't want to read, the chances are you have an open hole there into your network. And number 5, do you have antivirus and anti-malware software in place, and is it monitored? Right? It's not enough to install that software on a computer. You really have to have someone watching that, right? If you see a virus that shows up on one computer and then another computer and another computer, then that's something that someone needs to look at before it finds one of those 9.8% of all computers that aren't patched, where that vulnerability can get exploited. And so just looking over the results here, it seems like people are about 50-50. And most of these options cost nothing. Tell people to change their password, or they're incredibly cheap, $15 a year for training and testing. And we do have a longer version of this quiz, which I'll send out in a link after the webinar. And if you are interested, you can go through and answer the questions and get some feedback from the tool or suggestions of things that you can do to help increase the security of your network. Now, one of the biggest problems related to
Hey, Brent, I have a
ransomware
question.
Sure.
How would you get an assessment?
How would you get this up? Well, right. So I've got a number of tools that we have set up where you answer questions like this. These are not technical questions, but the answers that come back are I guess fairly technical. You can get some recommendations about making people change their password, where to go to get an email test. And one of the things that we do is come out and evaluate a network. So we will scan a network and then sit down and report the findings. And that is something that we are doing free of charge at this point, because every single time we've done that, we've gotten work from it. The most recent assessment that we did, we found the company owners and personal taxes were out on the network for everyone to see. And in the example before that, we had a company that had roughly 2,000 employees on payroll, and they had taken a computer, put it out in the lobby for job applicants to use, but they'd left the payroll data in place. And so they were giving everyone that walked into the door free and open access to payroll information for 2,000 people. And I would say over probably 15 to 20 years of doing these assessments. In every single case, I've found something on that order of magnitude that people have wanted fixed. That's a great question. And one of the biggest problems for IT companies today is that they want to sell something to clients to protect them from this, right? And in what the normal kind of way that starts is, buy my backup solution, you don't have a problem. Well, I've personally seen strains of malware that encrypt files over the course of a month. And so great backups, yeah, that's an important thing, but if you have to restore 30 different times and then sort through those to find the most recent version of a file, that takes days, and it's an extremely expensive proposition in terms of not being able to conduct business until the data comes back. There are lots of people in the IT industry that would sell you antivirus software or a patching service, right? These are definitely important things, but those alone are not, they're not a complete answer, right? The hack that happened at the SEC, the Equifax hack, no amount of antivirus software would have prevented those. Those were flaws in an application. Right? The computers at the National Health Service in Britain, tens of thousands of them, they had up-to-date antivirus, but the time WannaCry came out, only about 50% of antivirus vendors defended against it when it came out. Right? So new virus can literally spread across the globe before antivirus software catches up and can prevent it. Now, there are some forms of insurance you can buy. The most common form of cyber insurance will pay for the cost to recover data. Right? But if we go back to my warehouse example and we think of all the overtime that was paid in nearly a week without being able to ship product to customers, the cost to recover the data is insignificant. Now, there are some forms of insurance in place that will pay for lost revenue. But before you can get that insurance, they're going to come in, do an evaluation, and make sure that you have all the necessary safeguards in place. There are some other things that are important to have, some security policies, right? And that's a people policy. Don't click on links from strange emails. Maybe you require 2 people to view every wire transfer before it's approved. Right? Maybe that's positive pay that's set up with a bank. Maybe it's separate bank accounts. So there's some non-technical things that really can help, right? If someone's had access to a primary checking account but not a secondary account, at least you're not out of business if you can't use one checking account. It really is important to have a good firewall. A lot of smaller companies could have the cheap $40 firewall that they bought at Micro Center or Best Buy in town. And really, if you have a $40 firewall protecting your network, there's not much protection there at all. Spam filter is important, right? Wireless is important because when you let people onto your network, you don't know if their laptops or phones are safe or not. Filtering the internet is a very important piece. There's some interesting filters that can be put in place. Not only do they block the pornography, the hate crimes, the standard things you might expect when a computer gets infected and it tries to phone home and trade keys with the master server before it encrypts data on a PC. Well, if it can't phone home, then the infection stopped. So sometimes a good filter can actually prevent an infection, and then that filter reports back on which computer was infected, and the problem can be stopped before it spreads throughout a network. And training is also an important piece, but right, when you have a virus that can spread from computer to computer without human interaction, no amount of training will stop that virus. And now that I've gone through and kind of given you a list of everything you could try and why each one doesn't work, let's talk about what does work. And that's basically all of it. So all of those things individually are not enough to stop the problem, but when you put all of the pieces together, then you really do have a system in place that stops the vast majority of attacks or problems that you might face. And so what does that look like in practice? Well, first off, the spam filter should stop the attack from coming in, right? You should never have the opportunity to click on something, or it should be very rare when you have a good spam filter in place. Well, if an email with a malicious attachment makes it past the spam filter, there should be some end user training in place that makes that person on the keyboard think about whether or not they should click on something. Right? Is that safe or not? Is that reasonable to do the $3 million wire transfer to the bank in China my second week on the job? All right, there ought to be training in place that stops some of those attacks. But if someone does click on a link, then there should be antivirus software on the machine that has a chance to stop it. There should be anti-malware software on the machine that, like antivirus, but it kind of looks for different things, and that should have a chance to stop it. But if the antivirus doesn't catch the problem and the anti-malware doesn't catch the problem, then the computer should have the security patches that are freely available from Microsoft installed, and whatever exploit or flaw that malware was going after shouldn't be there to be exploited. Now, if the malware makes it through all that, right, and it does get installed and it tries to phone home, well, there should be a filter on the internet. So whether that's the firewall or a product like Cisco OpenDNS, there should be something that stops that malware from completing its process. But if it's able to phone home and it's able to be activated, well, there ought to be some policies in place on the computer. And these are technical policies that would stop the spread of that malware. So I guess the best example I have since 2012, if you have a file server, since 2012, Microsoft has included software in their server that will let you disable access if particular types of files have been created. So if you go onto the file server and you load a list of known crypto viruses or known files that are known to be malicious, and you can have the server disable access for a user the minute one of those are created. And so up to this point, if all of our previous steps have failed and that virus gets installed and it starts to encrypt data, then it should be able to encrypt one file and no more. So one file should be encrypted, and then the rest of the network is safe. And if the virus has made it past here, 3 more, there's 5, 6, 7 layers of protection. Now you're down to backups. Some forms of crypto viruses and computer viruses in general will try and detect the backup software that's in use and either disable that backup software, or they'll simply act over time. And so what you'll want is multiple layers of backups that work different ways that would fail for different reasons, right? So if your primary backup doesn't work, you go to your secondary backup. If that doesn't work, you go to your offsite or isolated backup. And so you've got at least three more layers here, 3 more chances to get your data back. Okay, so I think I'm approaching kind of the end of my time limit, and I wanted to leave a minute or two for questions. And so while we wait for questions, I've got a few things afterwards that I'll send out via email in case anyone is interested. So the first thing being the self-assessment tool. I'll have a shorter version and a longer version if you've got specific concerns. And you can fill those out, and the system will just automatically email you a report, and you can get some idea of things that you can start fixing right away. And would like to offer either myself or one of my engineers that could come out and run a scan of the network just to see what they can find, and then sit down and discuss the results. And I'll just put a link up here where you can go online and schedule that if you're interested. So if you click on that schedule link, you can put in your name and phone number, and we'll actually pick a time on the calendar, and we'll get somebody out there to take a look. And then one of the other things are just some kind of some websites that you might find helpful if you have security concerns. One of them is the Common Sense Security Framework. And then I'll have a list of questions and kind of recommendations and give you a strategy or a structure to a security program that you might put in place. And so I think I've seen Jenna hop on the webinar. Jenna, do we have any questions?
We do not have any questions, but if anyone has any additional questions they would like to ask, you can email me at jmorris@cloud-cover.me, and I'd be glad to help you. We appreciate everyone coming out today and joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, everyone, and I'll just hang out here for a few minutes, and just in case there are any questions. And we also have I guess a hard copy of this presentation that we can send out afterwards. I did see that question come through. Another question: How long does an assessment take? It depends on the size of the network. Typically, for 25 to 75 employees or computers, it's usually about 1 to 2 hours to run through that assessment, and then, depending on the amount of questions, half an hour or so to go over the results. Great question.